All right, guys, let's look at this particular rhetorical war and we can see how different techniques can be used to hammer different arguments. Let's start off with this. Slavery was really bad, denied people education, brutalized people, etc. Today, their descendants start out from a position of disadvantage. They face racism. They don't have as much money as the descendants of slave owners, etc. So the idea that somebody's putting forth here is that slavery was terrible at the time, but it also has effects that last to the present. The effects being less access to wealth, less access to other resources, facing things like racism, etc. And so what people do with that type of an argument is then they say, well, here's the next thing we should do. The solution. The solution is to give people who were descendants of slave money to make up for that. And that's called reparations. So if you're the descendant of a slave, the idea is you get a bunch of money from taxes. Now, reparations are popular with some people because they believe that rights are wrong, or maybe they just personally want to get some money. And it's unpopular with other people because they don't want to have to pay the money or they believe it's unfair. So now let's look at the counter arguments. This is the argument against reparation, is that people who are actually slaves are long dead. Blaming the past for your current shortcomings is ridiculous. In other words, yes, it's true that if somebody is a slave, they're facing a lot of negativity. They're facing all kinds of terrible things. But if your great-great-grandfather was a slave and you're saying that's what's holding you back today, that seems a little bit ridiculous. That's one counter-argument. Here's another counter-argument. Why should people whose ancestors came to America in the 1900s have to pay taxes to fund reparations? They couldn't have done slavery. Slavery was already illegal by then. So why should they be punished through higher taxes for something that neither they did nor that their ancestors did? And here's another classic counter-argument. If you personally didn't enslave anyone, why should you be punished for higher taxes? Even if your great-grandfather was a slave owner, why should you be punished for what he did? You didn't do it, he did it. You know, if your great-great-grandfather was a bank robber, you don't go to jail for that. He went to jail for that. We don't punish people for the crimes committed by their ancestors. So those are the classic counter arguments, and obviously neither the regular argument or the classic counter arguments really actually persuade anybody. Generally just makes people dig into their existing view. Whatever somebody thinks at the beginning of an argument, at the end of an argument, if they are presented a counter argument, they think that thing more. People become more certain in their views. Even if they're presented direct evidence against their views, that's what happens. So a more interesting approach would be to try to do an end run around this and say, it's to try to show that slavery wasn't even that bad. If you can show that slavery wasn't really that bad, then the argument in favor of reparations falls apart entirely. The argument in favor of reparations is based on the idea that slavery was terrible. So this is a clever way to oppose something like reparations. It could also similarly be used to oppose something like affirmative action. The idea is by showing that slavery wasn't that bad, we can then say that we don't need to correct for slavery in the